Welcome back to Finance Uncut. On today's episode, we have a look at why and how the Fed is hiding inflation.
So in that vein, Jaime, as you're using, let's say, history as a template for what's coming, do you see hyperinflation or major inflation as inevitable in this case?
I think it's inevitable because don't forget that hyperinflation occurs when people's spending patterns change. To a big extent, hyperinflation is a social effect because the worst of people comes to be and they start changing their social attitudes. Let me explain it to you differently. You're sitting in a cinema watching a movie and all of a sudden you start to smell smoke. How many people have to get up before everybody runs out? When everybody runs out, that's hyperinflation. That's too late. Right. I'm one of the first ones that's going to say, okay, you know what? I'm going to go wait by the door. I'm going to leave. Then there's that 10% that creates change. The rest, well, they're the ones that are always left on the boat. Right. So because of that, and I think we're already there, I think the silver squeeze movement is definitely signaling that. I think Bitcoin's definitely signaling that. You know, why is Bitcoin at 60,000? Because there are people that are smelling smoke and they're buying it. You know, I'm anxious to hear the debate between Michael Sayer and Fiera Capital and Frank Giustra, right? Because again, they're arguing both sides of the same coin, in my opinion. I think that both are components of each other, right? But what we have here is two people arguing inside the cinema. Oh, I think I smell smoke. What's the best solution, right? My solution is take both and run out.
So in a recent video I did entitled "Inflation Warning: What's Better, Silver or Gold?", I shared towards the end of that video a small snippet of an interview with Professor Richard Werner and Danielle DiMartino Booth, where I said it was the best macro video in the last 12 months, hands down. I told everyone it goes for an hour and 15 minutes. Go boil the kettle, make yourself a cup of coffee or tea or whatever you drink, sit down and watch it. And in that video, Professor Richard Werner lays out exactly how the whole system works, how the whole banking and central banking system works. And he, at the end, is warning of high inflation. Now, I also did a video called Buy Gold and Silver Now. And in this video, the reason why I did this video was because Professor Richard Werner replied to me on Twitter, where he said that he believes we're going to have hyperinflation within 2 years. And Michael Buddy also warned at around the same time as Professor Richard Werner that within 2 years we're going to have hyperinflation. Now, the SEC came to see Michael Buddy, and he's now off Twitter. And, this is the guy who shorted the housing market, saw the bubble, shorted it when everyone else laughed at him. And everyone's laughing at these two gentlemen right now, warning of hyperinflation within 2 years. Because if you listen to the Fed, you listen to central bankers around the world, you listen to the media, inflation's nothing to worry about. Don't worry about it. You know, there's only going to be a little bit, or it's going to be transitory is the word that they're using. And they've got, and I've shared this in other videos, in these videos, and I'll put links in the description below. So make sure you watch both those videos if you haven't watched them already, and watch the interview that Professor Richard Werner did with Danielle DiMartino Booth. You won't regret it. And yeah, why? The Fed are hiding inflation. Because if you actually saw the real inflation, you'd be jumping out of your currency, your local currency, just like people are doing in Turkey right now. So how are they doing it? And why are they doing it? Well, let's have a look. So this is the US CPI numbers. So you're telling me that when we had the Spanish flu, we had CPI numbers over 20%, and we've got CPI numbers at best 2.6%. Now, once again, you look at shadow stats, and they measure the CPI based on how we used to measure it in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And if you have a look at CPI today, measured the same way, using the same measurements that we used in the 70s and 80s in particular, inflation right now, CPI is around 10%. Around 10%. And likely to only get higher. In Australia, we've seen the monetary base skyrocket, absolutely skyrocket during 2020. And so it's not just the US Fed. Everyone talks about the US Fed and focuses on the US Fed. All the central banks around the world are doing this. It's like they've had a meeting at the Bank of International Settlements, and they've agreed that we're going to do this all around the world. And why? What's the end game? What's the end game? And that's what we're going to try to find out. We have a look at the M2 currency supply growth versus inflation. I don't like using that word money because it's not. Silver is money. Gold is a store of value or a store of wealth. Silver has always been money from day dot. Has been money more times than gold has been money throughout history. The things we have today, these paper notes, these debts, these notes, they're currency. It's not money. So, I use the word currency. So the M2 currency supply growth versus inflation. This chart speaks for itself. We have huge M2 currency supply growth, yet there's no inflation. There's no inflation. Now, what's interesting is, what's the Fed doing? So I've talked before in previous videos how we've got manipulation, in particular in gold and silver, massive paper markets to suppress the price of gold and silver. And that is one way that central banks are able to hide inflation. Because if you have gold and silver exploding, then that's a sign that the actual dollar, the currency, is actually going down. And that will force more people to flee out of the dollar, out of the currency, into hard assets. And so if we can we can manipulate that price of gold and silver down, then less people become aware of the problem. What have they done recently? Well, they've stopped reporting on the M1 and M2 currency supply. They've been doing it since what, was it 1969 from memory? I could be wrong. You fact check me, that's fine. All of a sudden now, the Fed is no longer reporting on M1 and M2 currency supply. Why? Why would they do that? You know why. You know why. So let's have a quick look at a video with Professor Steve Hanke, who is probably the global expert on inflation in particular around the world. He tracks all the inflation numbers from all the countries around the world. So let's cut to a clip from Professor Steve Hanke.
I want to ask you about what you said earlier on the priorities of the Federal Reserve. So before Volcker realized money supply was important as a tool for measurement, but now you're saying that the Federal Reserve no longer thinks that money supply is important. Is this a change in monetary policy? What's with this change in attitude? Where did it come from?
It's with Chairman Powell. He very explicitly claims that money doesn't matter. I mean, in recent testimony, he's basically said that money and the measurement of money doesn't really matter, because it's unrelated to inflation. Yes. M2, he said, is unrelated to inflation. So that was a fairly explicit thing.
He said specifically the correlation between money supply growth and inflation. Historically, that correlation is not strong. Is that even correct, Professor?
Yeah, that is incorrect. He said M2, which is the broadest measure that they're reporting at the Fed now. If you measure broadly at M3 or M4, that what he said is not correct. If you measure everything that has moneyness in it, they're actually M4. What Professor Burnett's measuring, M4, Divizia, has 14 measures in it, including treasury bills are even included as the last component. Now, they get a lot less weight in the Divizia index than does something like currency or a checking deposit, but they still get weight, and there are a lot of treasury bills out there. So even if you're weighting them lightly, the total amount adds up to a big number. And
when I told my peers they were doing this, the first response I got was, "This sounds suspicious. It's a little bit fishy. Maybe the Federal Reserve is trying to hide something."
Well, they are trying to hide something. They've changed the reporting frequency on M2 to monthly now, not weekly. So they don't want people paying attention to money supply growth. And the reason why is that in principle, they don't think it's important. They want to deep six the monetarists, basically, and push them off to the sidelines.
Is this because of MMT?
They want to bury Milton Friedman once and for all and be done with it. And their preference probably would be to not report any monetary statistics. Now, Friedman, of course, was a monetarist and was looking at the money supply correctly. And if you measure it broadly, correctly, like Barnett is with the Divizia indices, you get a very nice relationship between the growth of broad money measured by Divizia M4 and the growth in nominal GDP.
So let me ask you this. Let me ask. Powell has said that he does not expect inflation to be a long-term persistent force. Do you think maybe they've discontinued publishing these money supply series so that narrative could be be supported by existing data?
Well,
because according to this chart, let's just take a look at this chart, right? I mean, it's spiked up. Yeah.
To give you a short answer, yes, they don't want people looking at these money supply numbers. And the reason why, that chart that you have up there on the wall shows that M2 is spiked up. Now, what that means in most people's mind, the money supply has exploded, and we can expect a lot more inflation going forward. Now, the Fed wants to control inflation expectations, what people think about inflation. And the best way to control that is just take that chart off the wall, get rid of it.
Okay, we've gotten rid of it.
That's the name of the game. It's to control inflation expectations. And if you don't report monetary statistics on a frequent basis and have it as a headline kind of number, like in the old days, by the way, the weekly reports under the Humphrey-Hawkins Act, those weekly reports were paid attention to by everybody. I mean, they were reported and highlighted in the Wall Street Journal, all the financial press. Now you've got to hunt around, almost be an expert to figure out what in the world's going on, or go up to the Center for Financial Stability in New York and get the number, something like that. So this is to dampen down. They don't want to get the public excited about inflation. And Powell's saying, number one, we're not going to be reporting monetary numbers, even the incorrect kind of numbers or incomplete numbers that they have in M2. We're not going to report those every week. We're going to keep those to a monthly basis. So that's one thing going on.
Let me tie all this together now, Professor. One more question. One of the tenets of modern monetary theory, MMT, is that an increase of the money supply doesn't necessarily have to lead to inflation. Do you think that's the attitude the Federal Reserve is adopting, and this is potentially why they've stopped publishing M1, M2?
I think de facto the answer is yes. I mean, you've asked me a rhetorical question in a way. and you've obviously sniffed the thing out. You're like a good hound dog who's sniffing on the trail of something, and I think you're right on the money.
I don't want to make assertions or assumptions. I asked a question hoping maybe you might say no. I mean, I don't know, but you somehow.
I'm saying yeah. I'm saying yeah.
Okay. Very good. Steve, thank you very much. And we're going to be following up with you a couple of very shortly. And I want to talk about failed currencies. It'll be a very good conversation for the next episode. But thank you for coming on today.
Thank you for inviting me. Have a good day.
Inflation expectations still at all-time highs. So, every piece of data we're looking at. The other thing that the central banks are doing, that the Fed is doing to manipulate or to hide inflation, is they're actively involved in the tips market. They're actively involved in the tips market. You can see right here that the Fed has just been pouring into the tips market, buying tips like no tomorrow. So we've got the manipulation of gold and silver, which is a reflection of the currency market, the dollar. So we've got the manipulation happening there. We've got the manipulation in the tips market, the central bank buying so many tips. We've just got the central bank no longer reporting M1 and M2 currency supply. And, when people question this and people like me start saying you're trying to hide inflation, they come out with, oh, you're just conspiracy theory. You're just a conspiracy theorist. I mean, why hide? Why hide anything? If you got nothing to hide, don't hide it. Let the sunlight just expose the truth. If you got nothing to hide, just don't hide it. So the question is, why are they hiding it? So we've just got so much manipulation happening. Central banks are trying to hide it. The question is why? Why? What is the end game? Now, I've shared this chart in previous videos, once again, from the actual bond king, not the self-appointed bond king, but the actual bond king, billionaire Jeff Gundlach from Double Line, has this IMS prices that has a 4-month lead on CPI. And based on his data, he's expecting CPI mid-year to be 4%, to have a 4% in front of it. Now, you watch the central banks start talking about, oh, this is good news, folks. This is great news. Or it'll be just transitory. No need to worry. And just watch the yield curve control come into play. You watch it, because if the CPI does actually rise, and we know that that's been changed and manipulated to produce a much lower figure, and I'll tell you one reason why is because these governments have got commitments, pension commitments and social security commitments and whatnot, and a lot of them are based on the CPI numbers. So they increase based on the CPI numbers. Governments are broke. Governments are broke. So the lower that they can report the CPI number, the lower they have to pay out to pensioners and to people on social security. And that goes for the same thing here in Australia, the US, you name it, everywhere. So they've got to, they're working hand in hand with government here. And it's not conspiracy theory stuff. This is fact. This is fact. Now, I had to share this I had to share this tweet from Peter Schiff after Jerome Powell's 60 Minutes interview. He said that when it comes to inflation, it's different this time. He claimed that massive deficit spending and money printing now will not cause inflation the way they did in the 1960s and 70s. He's right. The inflation of the 2020s will be much worse. And, smart people are starting to warn this. Russell Napier, who's been a deflationist for the last 20 years, has turned on a dime and is now warning of inflation as well. He's talking about financial repression. So, and my buddy, the good professor, Richard Werner, tweeted this out. So it was the ECB's Panetta must accept no further delay in lifting inflation. He translates that as this: ECB, we need some real big boost to inflation. Translation: now that we have messed up and significant inflation is around the corner, let's pretend it's a great achievement for a central bank to cause inflation. And that's what they're going to do. They're going to come out with the narrative, the propaganda that this is good, folks, this is good. Or if it really gets out of control, look, it's just transitory. We've got the tools. The tools, when they've actually been asked what's the tools, it's raising interest rates. However, Paul Volcker, just before he died, was interviewed. So Paul Volcker was the Fed chair in the 70s and early 80s, and he was asked, if we have significant inflation like that again, could the central banks break the back of inflation the way you did it by lifting interest rates? And he said, absolutely no way, no chance. No chance. And not even, he wasn't even talking about the as high interest rates as he was talking about. Even half that level, he said, no chance. You'll have the biggest bust, the biggest deflationary depression the world has ever seen. Everybody will default on their debts. No one will be able to afford interest rates like that to control inflation. So we're really in a mess. We're really in a mess. And I believe that the central bankers and the central planners know that they have backed themselves into a corner and there is no way out. The way out that I believe that they are looking at taking is, yes, we will have inflation. And if it gets out of control and people start fleeing their local currencies or fleeing the dollar and going into hard assets or whatnot, and people lose faith in the currency, they've already started prepping us. The Great Reset, build back better. New form of capitalism, which has got nothing to do with capitalism if you actually have a look at it. They're prepping us. Cryptocurrencies. I'll talk about this in another video, but actually I'll talk about it in my next video, because I think that the central banks will say we need a reset. Time to reset. Reset the reserve currency. Have a global reset. And I believe that's going to involve gold and silver. Turkey right now. I'm gonna share this in my next video about Turkey, what they're doing right now, because people in Turkey are losing faith in the lira, in the Turkish lira, the currency. The Turkish government have asked people to bring in their gold. Now, I'm not going to tell people whether they should or shouldn't do that, but there's going to be a big reset, folks. There's no way out of this. We have now backed ourselves, or not us, central banks and governments have backed our society into a corner. And the only way out of this is narrative, propaganda, and ultimately a reset. And so we're going to have a look in the next video what that reset is going to look like. So what do you guys think? Do you guys think that the central banks have been hiding inflation? Why do you think they've been hiding inflation? Love to see your thoughts and comments down below. Don't forget to hit that like button. We really appreciate it. Hit that subscribe button, notification bell. Take care, everyone. I'll see you again on another episode of Finance Uncut.